to the Ed Morrissey Show. Today is Thursday, July 23rd, 2015. Joining me now, as always, Duane, Generalissimo Patterson of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, sir. Great to be back on the air, actually.
Great to be here. And if I were to send you just a minute sample of what my appearance would be like, would that constitute a full inspection of what my half hour is going to be?
Indeed. In fact, I would actually rely on you to provide that sample for me, Duane. I would, in fact, just simply trust you. Well, I trust you anyway. I mean, but that's because you're Duane.
You see, the thing is, this excrement sandwich that we're all being forced to chew was at least fresh last week. It's now getting the bread is now getting stale around the excrement sandwich, and it's getting less appetizing by the day.
Well, it all goes back to I believe I still have that on my gag clips reel. Hang on for just a second.
I have altered the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further.
This deal's getting worse.
Yeah, I have altered the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further.
What exactly is the selling point here again? I mean, honestly, honest to God, what is the selling point of this again?
It's peace in our time. It's smart power. We're going to give away the store without getting anything for it. It's called getting fleeced at the bazaar, as
and
Bob Corker put it.
While all this is going on, and while we are just throwing everything at Cuba and announcing yesterday that we are going ahead and going to close Gitmo and mothball that whole thing. And why the hell not? Because if we're not going to detain illegal aliens here, why should we detain illegal combatants in Guantanamo? I mean, at least they're consistent.
Right.
So, you got that going on. China is very quietly taking over the South China Sea, and tensions are rising there dramatically. So it's what a wonderful world.
Yeah, what a wonderful world. This deal, the side deal. Did you see this? The thing about the side deals? I'm sure you guys have talked about this. I've been on vacation for the last 3 days, so for some extent, I'm coming back to some of this cold this morning. But the side deal thing is really interesting. The IAEA cut a side deal with Iran that apparently preceded the negotiations here, which the White House insists, and you can trust the IAEA to be completely transparent on this, will settle the issue of, I think is it Parchin? The Parchin military site and other military inspections.
Yes.
Yeah. Except that nobody can see the text. Even the White House hasn't seen the text, but they've been fully briefed on it. And they feel very confident in in their knowledge of what that means.
Congress's role of oversight is they don't get to know the secret stuff, but you have to trust us when we tell you we've seen the secret stuff. You don't get to see it. You don't need to see it. Just go ahead and bless this thing anyway because the UN likes it.
That's it.
It's
trust us. Trust us.
What was the scene out of Animal House?
Yeah, that's you effed up. You trust us. You trusted us. That's going to come later. That'll come in about 3 or 4 years when the first mushroom cloud appears in the region. You effed up. You trusted us.
They're cheating now, right? I mean, they've been
cheating all along.
Already cheating. They have never not cheated, right?
Right. They've been cheating all along. That's one of the reasons why we're here where we're at. They signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Agreement, and they claim to be abiding by it. And instead,
didn't they claim all the way along? All the way along this process, didn't they claim that their nuclear program was always a peaceful one, that they were never working on a weapons program?
That's always been their position, but since 2003 anyway. Prior to 2003, they wouldn't even admit they were working on a nuclear program. That's what started this, was the fact that they were working on the nuclear program clandestinely. The Nuclear Proliferation Treaty allows signatories to pursue peaceful nuclear energy. But it has to be openly developed, and it has to be under the scrutiny of the IAEA. And until 2003, when it finally got exposed, Iran insisted for more than a decade that it wasn't working on nuclear technology, when in fact they were. And so the whole reason we're here at the table in the first place is because the Bush administration caught him cheating at the on the NPT. So, yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be here if Iran wasn't cheating on this thing. If Iran had just said in 2003, you know what? We're sick and tired of using up all of our oil for domestic energy production. We want to pursue the nuclear cycle so that we can build a power plant and generate electricity that way in a green manner. They could have done so. I mean, they still would have run into some opposition for the obvious reasons, but they could have done it that way. They chose not to do that, and it's because they weren't pursuing a peaceful nuclear energy program. That was the entire point.
Did you see the bit from Adam Credo over at the Free Beacon yesterday? He was talking about...
No, because I was on vacation yesterday, and I was enjoying myself on vacation.
Well, yeah, nuts to you.
I know.
A senior Iranian official by the name of Abbas Araghchi, who was Iran's deputy foreign minister and was one of the guys at the table in Vienna doing the talks, right?
Yep.
He insisted during the negotiations that Iran be able to purchase and ship military hardware at any time and from any place, according to the comments made on state-controlled television. He vowed, quote, to buy weapons from wherever possible, and said that Iran is to provide weapons to whomever and whenever it considers appropriate, according to a translation of his comments made by the Open Source Center.
Right. This is standard sovereignty stuff. They want the same sovereign rights everybody else has. Yeah.
The White House, we've been playing all week long the dance of, did we say anytime, anywhere? No, we never really meant anytime, anywhere. Yeah, we did say that. Yes, Ben Rhodes said it, but no, we didn't mean it. This is this guy who was at the table saying, I've got your anytime, anywhere right here. Here's what anytime, anywhere means.
Right. Yeah.
We're going to do what we want when we want, and you're going to go ahead and give us money anyway. Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, author of the book Ally, who we had on our show about 2 weeks ago for a long period of time. He said the number that's floating out is not really even $150 billion because the way this deal works, contracts can be signed immediately. And even if Iran cheats and the snapback sanctions have to, quote, go back in, right?
Right.
Part of the provisions of the snapback sanctions are existing contracts aren't affected by them.
Right.
He says, make no mistake about this. By the time they add this up, they're going to get $700 billion worth of sanctions relief.
Yeah.
Before anything could theoretically even be snapped back, and it wouldn't even apply to it. We're going to give them this is the stimulus plan. I mean, we thought we did a really good job pissing away $700 billion here. Can you imagine what they can do with $700 billion?
I imagine it'll be a lot more effective in their hands than it was in the Obama administration's hands.
I'm thinking they're going to get more bang for their buck, don't you?
Literally. Quite literally more bang for their buck. Yes, Duane, I think you have put it well.
So the question is, the only promise that Obama seems to give a good rat's ass about is whether or not Iran is going to at least wait until he has the good decency to leave town before launching the first Scud. And I don't know if they're going to do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what we think we're getting out of this agreement. Whatever it is, it clearly isn't going to stop them from getting a nuclear weapon. It's clearly going to enable them to expand their terror operations in the region.
It's almost begging them to.
It really is. I mean, it's almost it's really a carte blanche, is what it is. And I said this at the time. It's a signal that we are retreating from the region. It's a signal to Iran. It's a signal to Saudi Arabia, which apparently just decided to hold some talks with Hamas for the first time in a while. Thank you very much.
It's as though Barack Obama has this stamp in his hand. He's got all these, approved, vetoed. He's got all these stamps next to his desk. He's got a brand new stamp that says "Not my problem," and he just went bam right over the Middle East.
It's this was the can for kicking in road. Boom. That's and really not very subtly. I mean, it is basically just taking the handcuffs off of Iran and saying we really don't care. After we're out of office, we really don't care how this thing turns out. It's somebody else's problem.
So I don't even know if we talked about the provision last week or not. I don't even think we did talk last week, did we? I don't think you were around last week, or did we do stuff last week? I don't remember.
Yeah, we did do stuff, but you couldn't make it. Remember?
It was 2 weeks ago. Oh, that's right. That's right. It was my fault.
Well,
So
it wasn't your fault. I mean, you were busy.
So this annex thing comes down, right? And this annex says the sabotage clause, right?
We did talk about this a couple of weeks ago. Yes. We are now going to be on the side against Israel when it comes to stopping a nuclear weapons program.
Israel is, if there's anything that has unified this poor country, it's been this deal. It doesn't matter what political party you are in Israel right now. Everybody hates this deal, and I mean everybody hates this deal.
Yeah, the guy that was Obama's bestest buddy in the Israeli elections told Jeffrey Goldberg at The Atlantic, not exactly a conservative.
Got out of your mind, right?
Right. I mean, I don't mean to impugn Jeffrey Goldberg because he's a good writer and he's got some really good insight into Israeli politics, especially at The Atlantic. But I mean, he's not a conservative. He's been sort of more or less an Obama supporter for much of the administration on some policies. And so when he writes a story that says Netanyahu's political opponent also throws this deal under the bus and says it's terrible and Israel's going to have to act on its own, you know that this is a problem in Israel. It is a political consensus in Israel that this deal stinks.
So if Israel acts on its own, they've got one of two choices, really, right? They can either try and sabotage the program and slow it down again.
Right.
Doing their Stuxnet, which we are now committed to prevent. Or they hit the big button, right? Yeah. I mean, because they don't have the capacity to sustain that kind of distance and sustain a conventional war against Iran, right? I mean, they just can't do it. They don't have
any
that
kind of war, really. Any kind of war. It's a nation of 6 million people, right? Right.
So the question is, they have to act, right?
I'm thinking they're probably going to have to, and I think that Saudi Arabia might actually help them out with it.
And if that happens, what do? Do we just say, well, that's inconvenient, or do we just ignore it, or we just join the world in condemning it, but then just step back and say, not our problem, not our fault? I mean, how does this play itself out?
You know what the best possible outcome of this is, and it's also the least likely now that we've made this agreement with the mullahs, would be an internal coup that replaces the mullahocracy with a popular government, because a popular government is not going to want to start that kind of a war.
Correct. The problem with, and I agree with you, the problem with that theory is we have just solidified them.
We've just
poured the concrete to make sure that they stay in place.
And not just. Ever since 2009, Obama has been fortifying the mullahs. He's been reaching out to the mullahs rather than reaching out to the people who are being oppressed by the mullahs and the Revolutionary Guard. And he's validated them.
He's done the ghastly thing, which is to legitimize them.
Yeah, exactly. He's
endorsed given them a voice on the world stage.
Yeah, he's endorsed them. Now I was on vacation, and I'm going to tell you that as often as I possibly can because I just know how that makes you happy for me, Duane. But I was on vacation the last few days, so I didn't hear details on this. But bring me up to date on what's going on in the Iranian parliament, because suddenly that seems to be, almost like,
Oh yeah, this is
Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's our only hope, right?
The long and short of it is, the Iranian parliament doesn't like the deal because it's not one-sided enough for Iran, and they want more. So they're going to reject the deal and demand more concessions and kick it back. That's the long and the short of it.
Well, wouldn't that be the best of all possible outcomes for Obama?
So the question is...
seriously, no, I mean, let's think about that for a minute. That really is the best of all possible worlds for Obama. If Iran rejects the deal, then there's not much that the rest of the world powers can object to when you try to put the sanctions back in place and freeze the assets that are still, at least for the moment, still frozen. When you clamp down on that, Obama can walk away saying, "Hey, look, we gave it our best shot. We were willing to give away more than what we could get support for at home, and the Iranians threw it in our faces. So therefore, the hell with you." He gets credit for the outreach. There's no "I told you so" down the road, and
except. Here's where Obama's in a box. How did he paint this deal? He didn't say this was a good. He originally said this was a good deal. They've now abandoned that position. This is no longer a good deal. What this is there's no alternative. It's either this or war, right?
Yep.
That's how they're trying to put our arms behind our back and force us to go along with it, force Congress to go along with it, because if we don't do this, you have no alternative. The only alternative is war, and all these war Okay, so if Iran turns this down and there's no deal, what does that mean according to Obama logic?
Well, it means that there's going to be war.
And
when it doesn't materialize, of course, he'll look like a big hysteric. But he's still better off with that than doing this deal and having it literally blow up in his face.
Well, I'm not convinced the deal would blow up in his face. I hope it would, but I don't know if the numbers are there.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when Iran gets caught cheating, when Iran conducts its first nuclear test. That's what I'm talking about, the deal blowing up in his face. He's better off with Iran tubing the deal.
Walking away from the deal and having him be saved by
I was the guy who
Iran's
wanted peace. I was the guy willing to cut a hard deal for us and the world and blah, 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 blah. And actually, out of all the possible outcomes I see from this point forward, that's the best for us too. Because it really is. Because it's the one that at least still keeps the sanctions on Iran, the one that keeps the money out of the mullah's hands to fund more terrorism.
It keeps us from being formally committed to work against Israel's interests.
Exactly. That's at least that's the outcome that preserves more or less the status quo ante. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, if they come back and say, no, we need to renegotiate this some more, and then at that point, if Obama goes back to the negotiating table,
then good God, then you've got a coup coming here.
You've got no chance of that flying over here. There's zero chance that it would fly over here.
But even if it doesn't fly here, is it going to fly with the other P5 countries?
A renegotiated deal after this deal?
Yeah.
No.
Russia and China?
No. No, because Russia and China won't get Europe to go along with that. Europe, France might be happy with this deal. I don't think Germany's happy with this deal.
How bad do they want the oil?
I don't think they want it that badly. Oil's relatively cheap at the moment. If they want it, they can buy it. You can get it from Norway. You can get it from other places. Oil is relatively cheap. So then what's
the money motivation for doing this? Just selling them weapons?
Selling them electronics. I mean, selling them technology. That's what the draw is here. And Germany and France will both profit rather well from that once the sanctions are lifted. But I mean, even those two, I think, would look at this as, this is as far as we go, and we're not going to go any farther. And if Iran rejects it after agreeing to it at the bargaining table and says you all have to come back, I don't think you get that band back together in the West either.
Yeah. Hey, if that's how this goes down and Iran actually saves us from ourselves, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I think that's the best outcome, because honestly, what we're doing now is a death spiral. I mean, it really is.
Well, there's a lot of that going around. There's a death spiral in Obamacare. There's a death spiral in debt. We seem to be specializing in death spirals.
I've been meaning to go through these stories on the after show. I've got a pile of Obamacare stories, and I just never get around to it. But everything I'm reading, hey, you know what? It's costing a lot more than what they said it was going to cost.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Funny that. North Dakota, was it North Dakota? I think I read that their Medicaid expansion is costing them a lot more than what they thought it was going to cost.
Yes.
I mean, there's all sorts of...
Well, that's going to be true of every state that went along with this.
Of course it is.
Because after, was it 5 years, the federal government backstop on that is going to disappear, and they're going to be responsible for all of the expansion costs under the normal formula. And so those prices are going to go up anyway. But yeah,
Veronique Desrougier over at Nash Review did the story about a week ago, and she listed state by state of, we're seeing 33% increases here and 25% increases there, 36% in Tennessee increase, 54% increase in Minnesota. Oh, Minnesota, 54% increase.
54% increase. Yeah, it's huge here. It's and you know what the thing is about Minnesota?
That's not very Minnesota nice of the insurance companies, is it?
You know what the problem here for people in Minnesota is that this was already sort of a system that was unusual. First off, this state does not allow for-profit health insurance. You have to be a nonprofit to offer it. And
which
so
is goofy on its face anyway.
It's goofy on its face anyway, but they already had those controls about how much of your income has to get plowed back into payouts and that sort of thing. Those calculations already existed in Minnesota. And the system worked reasonably well here. At one point, I thought I was going to have to get my own health insurance, and I would have had to pay an override for about a year. I would have had to pay a premium, an extra premium to get state-backed health insurance for pre-existing conditions for a year before I could sign up for a regular commercial insurance plan. And it was going to be pricey. I mean, it wasn't going to be cheap, but it wasn't going to be the type of premiums that these plans are getting right now. And the deductibles were lower. And so the premiums were going up about, 6 to 7% a year. I mean, it was ahead of inflation, which was part of the problem, that whole cost curve bending exercise that the White House used to talk about before now. But they weren't going up 50% in a year, 54% in a year.
Right.
And bear in mind that this is on top of, I think it was, a 19 or 21% increase the year before. I mean, it's going to double in a couple of years.
But this is the pattern with Barack Obama. I mean, you see it in the Iran deal. The Iran deal, it started out, this is going to be a good deal. We're going to keep them from having nuclear material. They're going to get rid of their material. They're going to have full inspections, and we're going to keep them from getting the bomb. And now the deal is, well, it's a deal that's better than the alternative, and
right.
that's the main selling point. So he's kind of changed the goalposts there with Obamacare.
The goalpost moving is a
it's an art form.
It's a national pastime at the White House, especially on Obamacare. They've moved
right,
the goalposts on bending cost curves. They've moved it on.
It was going to bend the cost curve down. The average family was going to see a $2,500 decrease in premiums. Everything was going to go down. This was the way to reduce prices. And he can't come back and say, well, it would have been better if we would have just had a single-payer system. He's trying to make that claim now. But at the time, he's saying this deal, not what we would have wanted to do with this deal and then expanding it and turning it into a single payer system, only then will we bend the cost curve down. That's not what he said. He said this plan, the one that this crap sandwich that we're going to pound down your throat whether you like it or not, this plan is going to bend the cost curve down, and with it, it's going to create jobs, and it's going to lower the costs on an average of $2,500 a family. I've yet to meet the family that has seen that $2,500 check. It may exist out there somewhere in unicorn land, but I haven't seen it yet. So far, it's jacked everybody's rates up. It had to. It's simple. It's actually simple economics. It has to.
It's simple risk pool economics. If we've been predicting this for 5 years, we looked at this when it was rolled out, and we said there is no way that this is going to be where you're going to be able to lower premiums in this type of environment. Not with all the government mandates. Right.
It can't not go up when you expand the coverage to include stuff that you could have people opt out of and pick and choose what stuff they wanted covered. You now have to mandate coverage for stuff, so your payouts are going to be higher. There's no way that it could not jack rates up. There just isn't.
No, there was
no alternative.
This is the outcome that people who understood basic economics and risk pools predicted, was that you were going to have overutilization. You're going to have the mandates were going to drive all sorts of different patient behaviors and provider behaviors. You're going to have narrowing of provider networks. You're going to have
fewer doctors, higher premiums, and
higher deductibles.
And that's just on the policy side of implementing the policy.
Yeah,
that's not even the management of it, the administrative
no,
side.
I think we may have actually underestimated how badly it was going to get managed. But I mean, we did, yeah,
because I see a story here. It was a Daily Caller this last week by Alex Pfeiffer that federal auditors successfully scammed Obamacare 11 times out of 12 times they tried.
It's interesting.
They spoofed the system 11 out of 12 times.
Yeah, there's more to that story though. There's more to that story. Now, when I first read that story, I think we may have discussed it last week when you were gone. But when I first read that story, I thought, golly, that sounds like they're pulling an old news report, because sometimes that happens. People will get a date wrong. They'll miss the date on it, and they'll think it's a brand new story when it turns out it's a year old or 2 years old or whatever.
No, this is 2015.
Right? No. So I looked at it and go, no, the date's right. I wonder because this sounds so familiar. It's like a really deja vu. And so I looked into the report, which is a GAO report, if I remember correctly.
Right.
And it was a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, the GAO reported the same thing. And what this report is the 1 year follow-up from the previous year. And of the 11
previous
accounts,
year was as bad.
Well, no, it's the same accounts. They 11 out of 12 was what happened last year. A year later, they only caught one of the 11 accounts being fake, and they auto-renewed all 11 of them. Then, for some reason, 6 of them, the HHS or healthcare.gov said, "Oh, you've submitted a new application," which GAO had not done, and we're missing some of your documentation, so we're suspending your insurance. So they resubmitted the fake documentation.
So the spoofed hack accounts, the system couldn't clean up on their own after a year.
Not even after they knew about it, right? Because GAO reported it to Congress and they reported it to HHS. And so they resubmitted phony paperwork for those 6 accounts, 5 of which were reopened. All of which got even higher subsidies than they had been getting the prior year. I mean,
it's
a year later,
it's just...
And so they asked the vendors, because these are contractors that are handling this stuff for HHS. And the contractors told them, we're not set up to determine, to look for fraud or abuse.
Could you imagine what would happen if they actually did get single payer in and everybody had to go through the system?
Oh my gosh. It would be awful.
It would have to collapse under its own weight.
Well, first off, what you'd wind up with is a cash economy in providers for people who could afford it. Yeah.
You would have a black market for appendectomy
and
stuff.
I don't know that you could actually. It wouldn't be a black market in the sense that it would be illegal, because I don't know that you could actually make that illegal. I don't think you could actually. I mean, even with John Roberts being on the court, I don't think you could make a pay for direct illegal to a provider, right? But what they could say is, no, you are required to put your money into the system.
If they make it single payer, they could.
No, I don't even think you can do that in Canada. I think you can still contract for privately. You just can't get insurance for it. You have to do it. You have to pay cash.
Okay.
And so that's the thing. You can eliminate private insurance, and everybody's on Medicare basically at that point in time. But you can still pay cash for providers. But the only people who are going to be able to afford that once you start drawing Medicare premiums out of everybody's paycheck is the people who are wealthy enough to be able to do it. So you're going to wind up, just like in Canada, you're going to wind up with people who are stuck in a system, or the UK for that matter, stuck in a system that's substandard and does a poor job of maintaining health. And then you have the rich people who can go out and make sure that they get their own health care taken care of on their own. And that's what you're going to wind up with. That's what happens when you force everybody into an insurance plan.
And the net result of it is, because of the weight, because of the sheer machinery of it that is going to be gummed up because of bureaucracy,
right?
Clogging up all the cogs and sprockets.
Yeah, all you have to do is look at the VA. If you want to find out what
people die.
Right.
And people die that don't necessarily need to die.
And the bureaucrats corrupt the system in order to cover up their own incompetence, and there are no other alternatives. So you're stuck in a system. You're stuck being ignored until you die. That's what happened. That's what happened in the VA. It's what's happening in the VA to this day. Even though we know about it, we've known about that for years.
Right.
Actually,
It's still going on right now
because there's no alternative for the people who are stuck in that system unless they have enough money to go get their own insurance someplace else.
And there is no motivation from DC to fix it.
No, they bluster a lot.
They hold hearings, talk a lot about it. Nobody's going to fix it. The administration has no goal to fix it.
They fired Shinseki. What have they done after that?
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing. They haven't given these guys any choices.
They've given away Gitmo, Cuba, the South China Sea, and Iran. They've had bigger fish to fry than worry about the vets.
Right. They paid lip service to the vets, and they're going back to ignoring them again. That's what that's about. All right. Want to move on to
what they did do is they waited a week to lower the flag half-staff after 4 Marines and a sailor were shot in Chattanooga. That's what they did.
Honestly, that's just incompetence. How difficult is it to issue an order to lower a flag to half-staff? And nobody thought of that. Nobody thought to do that.
When the space shuttle blew up, flags were dropped.
Yeah, Reagan ordered it immediately.
In 30 minutes?
Well, at least by the next day. Maybe earlier than that, but at least by the next day, flags were coming down.
I remember distinctly driving around and seeing flags dropped within hours of that day.
Well, some of that may have been people just doing it on their own, too. But, yeah, I mean...
They may have, but it was also talked about in the radio. Flags had been ordered, dropped half-staff immediately.
At least within a few hours, right?
That day.
Right. At least within a few hours. They got that handled. Nobody in this administration.
It took a week for 4 dead Marines and a sailor to warrant enough response from the commander-in-chief to say, we probably should drop the flags a little bit.
It reminds me of what Casey Stengel said when he saw the Mets play in their first season. Can anyone here play this game? Can anyone here play this game?
It's
such an unforced error. It really is. I mean, there's no cost to saying lower the flag to half staff when you have five dead servicemen from what everybody understands to be a terrorist attack. I mean, this isn't even a workplace violence thing, right? It's a terrorist attack. That's what it is. And they were shot while they were on duty. And it makes perfect sense to lower the flag to half staff, but nobody in the White House seemed to think to do that. Instead, you had Valerie Jarrett tweeting out about different things, and
reflexively, they can't bring themselves there unless there is a political motivation that meets their agenda. There is obviously a political motivation to do that. The problem is that nobody realized it. nobody thought about it. Nobody thought to think, shouldn't we lower a flag? If the Marines were transgendered Marines, the flags would have been dropped.
Yeah, I mean it's basic politics. That's the stuff that you hire staff to think about. It's incompetence. It's just simple incompetence.
But that's why we trust them to do the Iran deal, because they got this. Yeah, we got this
because they're so sharp. Smart power. All right, I want to talk about the election campaign.
Yeah,
Donald Trump.
I almost got through an entire week without having to say Donald Trump.
Trump
almost got through in a week.
You know what I think is the one benefit of having Donald Trump back in the race?
Yeah,
Berkeley Breathitt is writing Bloom County strips again.
Well, there is that.
I loved that comic strip when it was going on in the 1980s. It was really the best political comic strip. Usually pretty balanced.
I had this fight on Monday with Brian Kaye, who's the editorial page editor of the Orange County Register here and so-called conservative. I kid. He's fine. So Brian and I had this fight over Trump, and he hates Trump. And I don't have the animosity towards Trump. It's not that I hate him. I just cringe when he does what he does. I wouldn't do it in the same way he does things.
He's a self-promoting demagogue. I mean, I don't hate the guy,
absolutely. But now that said, we had this fight on the air, and Brian says, if you had your choice between voting for Hillary or Donald Trump, who would you vote for? And I said, that. Binary choice, no question. I'd vote for Trump over Hillary in a second. Binary choice, not. He says, "Oh, you got to go third party." I said, "No. You offered me a binary choice. If Donald Trump runs the gamut and gets the nomination, and it's him versus Hillary, I think Hillary's that bad. That now Donald Trump, if you want to create the imagery of a sludge-filled grease barrel, and Donald Trump somehow with that thing on his head and his fingernails is holding on to the side of the barrel, he's not quite on the bottom of the barrel where Hillary Clinton resides, flapping her wings in Dante's Ninth Circle of Hell. I see Trump as a stage above Hillary, maybe not a big stage above, but a stage above. So that to me is an easy call. That said, Donald Trump is not going to be the nominee of the Republican Party. He's just not. If you were a campaign advisor, if you were a campaign manager right now, and the first debate isn't even until September, and the first primary isn't even until what? When does the caucus in Iowa? Late January, early February?
Late January. Right now, it might get moved up. You never know with these things.
Do you want your candidate white hot in July of the year before?
No, of course not. And this happened 4 years ago too. Don't forget, Donald Trump was drafting 25% in May 2011, and he was out of the race by about this time 4 years ago.
I will get in trouble by saying this, but it is the truth. Ann Coulter is very popular amongst a circle of people in the Republican Party, in the conservative movement. She says the right things that really get people's juices going, and that's fine. If that's what does it for them, I have no problem with that. The reason we don't talk about Ann Coulter every waking moment of the day now is because what Ann Coulter's claim to fame is to say something totally off the charts, in your face, abrasive, that was shock value. And you went, whoa, did you hear what Ann Coulter said? And everybody talked about Ann Coulter. Well, then that buzz kind of died down, and so she had to say something even more extreme to get people to get the same reaction to it.
Right.
You get the law of diminishing returns with Ann Coulter. At some point, she runs out of things to say that are extreme without being so marginalized that nobody pays attention to what she says anymore.
I will add to that, though, that she is a fun person to interview. I got a chance to interview her twice, and she is a blast.
And honestly, Donald Trump is a fun person to interview. When Hugh interviews Trump, it's a hoot and a half. It really is on a Carnival Barker showmanship thing. He's a fun guy to talk to. But Donald Trump, at some point, he's going to say the same crazy stuff, and when he says the same crazy stuff, at some point it's either going to be old and boring, and people are going to get their attention's going to say, well, yeah, okay, he's right, but I've heard that kind of stuff before, and he's not going to get the desired result, and he's going to start falling back to earth because he's not saying the same earth-shattering stuff he's always said, or he's going to have to keep pushing that needle out there even more, and if he does, he's going to marginalize himself where he's not going to be a factor. Right. And he may go third party, and he may take 4% of the party with him and go third party. Well, fine. If he does that, he neutralizes Rand Paul. Fine by me. I don't think he's going to be the nominee of the party. I have no favorites at this point. Honestly, at this point, I could go with anybody on our side except maybe Rand Paul, because I don't like his foreign policy a whole lot. But even if he gets the nomination, I'd still probably hold my nose and vote him over Hillary, because I think Hillary is supreme evil in all of the universe. But if you look at the numbers right now and you look at the Electoral College map, I'm sure looking at Florida and Ohio and thinking, you got to have somebody from Ohio that can carry that state. And you got to have somebody that can carry Florida, because if you can carry those two states, all of a sudden that map against Hillary looks a lot more doable.
Yeah. No doubt about it. And I mentioned Trump just because it's kind of fun to bring him up. But let's talk about Hillary Clinton's poll numbers, because I think that this did not get the attention it deserved yesterday.
It did, and it didn't. It got trumped by other stuff. Not part of the pun. But,
pun intended. It got trumped. I say.
I know.
But I mean, these were bad numbers.
The head-to-head horse race stuff, I don't care about. Totally irrelevant. That's not the number.
It's not totally irrelevant. No, I want you to go with your thing, and I'll come back to that. It's not totally irrelevant, but it but it doesn't matter as much as people think it does.
You're right. I mean, is it interesting now? Is it it's
indicative now too. But go with what was your thought before I interrupted you?
it should be an oh shit moment for any campaign manager to look up and see in three swing states that you are losing to 3 of the potential GOP candidates head to head.
Yeah,
that should be an oh shit moment. No question. I don't think that's the big tell. The big tell here is the favorable unfavorability number.
I think it's the compassion number in the Quinnipiac poll. That was the big tell. Her compassion numbers are in all 3 states
off the chart upside down.
Off the chart upside down, and this is key because that is the Democratic coalition marker in polls.
Nowhere was Barack Obama upside down in likability or charisma. He never was.
And especially not compassion. And I don't think he's upside down on that now. I think that is one area in which he's maintained a positive rating throughout his entire presidency. And that's when the rest of his personal qualities, I should say, have gone underwater, like honesty.
Hillary Clinton, even to Democrats right now, is about as lovable as a case of lupus. She's just not an attractive person.
No.
Physically, emotionally, orally. I mean, listening to her speak,
Thank you. Rhetorically,
I think
I
she was
think
asked a question yesterday about a trade. Actually, it may have been this morning. She was asked a question in South Carolina about the trade deal with China, and honest to God, she says, I have been for trade deals. I have been against trade deals. I have been with my president on trade deals, and I have been against trade deals against my president. And so I say that talking out of both sides, but that's where my position is.
Well, yeah.
She won't take a freaking position on anything.
That's not the first time she said that, by the way. That is not the first time she said that.
She said that before.
Yeah.
She's saying that she's kind of for the Iran deal, but she's leaving herself a way out in case the whole thing goes south. She is not exactly a profile in courage right now.
No, she's not taking any positions, which would make sense for somebody who hasn't done national politics before. I mean, you could almost make this argument that Ben Carson and Donald Trump could take those positions, but Hillary Clinton's been in national politics for 23 years. She's either been in the Senate or the state or Secretary of State for 12 years.
She's been in politics. She has been in politics since Jimmy Carter taught Sunday school. The thing about Barack Obama in 2008, did he take a position on a thing or two?
Oh, sure.
Like the Iraq deal, healthcare.
Yeah.
Did he take positions on things?
He did.
Did Hillary Clinton in 2008 take a bunch of positions on things?
I believe she did, but I think she was slippery in that cycle as well.
She was slippery in that cycle as well because she thought she had it in the bag early on until this upstart came out of nowhere, and then she had to start hardening up a little bit. But she thought she was going to coast then.
Yep.
And what is she doing now? She's coasting. She doesn't want to take a stand because she thinks if she takes a stand too hard on anything, it's going to come back and bite her in the general. So she thinks she's going to coast. Well, let her coast. That's fine. She is not winning over the hardcores. I mean, are Democrats going to vote for her? Of course they're going to vote for her because they've got nothing. They've got nowhere else to go. Realistically, I mean, they really don't. But are they going to crawl through broken glass to make sure that they save the cause and force people to get out of their houses and into the vans and go march people in there? Oh, Hillary's going to have her get out the vote team, but the rank and file Democrat American voter that's out there, are they going to crawl through broken glass to vote for Hillary?
No.
Yeah,
that's one of my points from this poll. I was looking at this yesterday. Most of these polls right now are name recognition polls. I mean, it's really what they are. And I've written this before.
And she has 100%
right.
name ID.
This is my
hit the ceiling.
Right. This is my point. If you're up against Scott Walker, who's got like about 60% or 58% of people who are undecided about him,
right,
and he's still beating you by 10 points.
I can walk outside of my office right now, stand on the street corner, ask anybody to walk by, what do you think of Scott Walker? My guess is 6 out of 10 aren't going to know who the guy is.
Right. So when you have that sort of situation, and he's beating somebody with 100% name recognition by 10 points, I believe it was in Colorado.
Not good.
That is a very, very bad sign because there's not enough upside in Hillary's unknowns to get her significantly higher than that. Now, if it turns out to be Trump, those numbers will change. But if it's Walker, if it's Rubio, who was the third? It wasn't Bush. Walker, Rubio, and...
who was the third?
I can't think of who it was now. But, I mean, clearly, she couldn't get to 40% in Iowa or Colorado. I think she just got to 40% in Virginia. In Virginia, mind you,
right,
which has been a blue state, mind you, for a while. And she can't get past 40%. And again, Virginia is very close to the Beltway. These are not people who are anti-Beltway populists in Virginia. By and large,
it's a conservative state with 2 counties of federal workers that swamp the rest of the election.
Well, a little bit more than 2 counties, but yeah.
Well, 3. I mean,
yeah,
you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
It's basically 2 or 3 counties in the north end of the state, just outside the Beltway. That's the burbs of Washington D.C.
Exactly,
and they're all federal workers, federal employees, union workers, and that's how the state votes because there's more of them living in those 3 counties than the rest of the state combined. It's like California. Yeah. If you take L.A. County and you take the Bay Area out of California, the whole state's red. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people that live in those 2 little regions, and that's why the state goes blue every time.
Right.
It's kind of how Virginia is. But those federal employees, they're not huge, big, goal stinking fans of Hillary. That they're just, I mean, they'll vote for her because they're union members and they feel like they have to. But is the intensity there? Do they think Hillary's going to really do it for them? No. Do they think Hillary's in it for herself? Yeah.
Yeah, and that the problem is that there's not that much of a margin. I mean, you take a look at what happened in 2012, and Obama only won by a couple of points. And if you don't get the turnout that Obama got in 2012,
and you have, if you have a ticket that has, you know, avowed conservatives on there, or, you know, governors from popular states that, you know, popular governors from states that have a record to run on, and they put a good message forward, a good communicating message forward. If we can't get the entire Republican base that's out there to vote this time against Hillary Clinton, then I give up.
Well,
because
we'll look at that in a little bit more in depth. But the other point I wanted to make about the numbers, the head-to-head numbers, is that Hillary Clinton is really if she's not the incumbent in this race, she's the continuity candidate. The only reason why for a non-Democrat to vote for Hillary Clinton is to basically ask for a third term for Barack Obama.
Oh, she's the stay-the-course candidate.
She's the stay-the-course candidate.
Absolutely, she is.
And you only got 38% of people willing to back the stay-the-course candidate in Colorado in, was it 16 months ahead of the general election?
Right.
What does that tell you?
Right. And then you factor in, we know what Obamacare is going to look like next year. And when that starts to get factored in and the misery index increases on Americans between now and next year, who pays the price for that?
Yeah, I was looking at an analysis by Stephen Parente, who's a health economist from the University of Minnesota, looking at these really huge premium increases. He says this is the big bubble year for that. But next year, there's going to be probably a significant increase, not as much, but a significant increase around, double-digit increase across the board next year as well. And then after that, it might start calming down a bit because all of the factors will be in play.
Then, if you're a Democrat, electorally speaking, it's too late.
Oh, absolutely, it's too late. But there's going to be next summer, about this time next summer, there's going to be more stories coming out about 10, 12, 14% increases in premiums. And yeah, it's going to get ugly. You know what? We're
You booting me? You got bigger guests on the air line?
No. He's not up for another 9 minutes, but I wanted to just touch base to see what you wanted to talk about and then start looking at tonight's Hugh Hewitt show.
Oh, we didn't even talk about the Planned Parenthood thing.
We didn't. Let's talk about that briefly.
We can talk about that briefly, even though we shouldn't cut the talk about Obama or over Planned Parenthood short. We shouldn't abort our coverage early on that because that would just be gasoline wrong.
We should just harvest some parts of the Planned Parenthood controversy.
Yes, we should.
And
Don't get crunchy in your coverage here.
I will try not. I'm going to try to dilate on a few different points, but I mean, this is ghastly stuff. I know we're kidding around about it, but it's difficult to even kid around about this stuff. It's ghastly what they're discussing, how they're discussing it, and
Jan Schakowsky, Democrat of Illinois, House of Representatives, and staunch Hillary Clinton supporter, wants the Federal Department of Justice to open up an investigation, not on Planned Parenthood, not on their policies, not on them negotiating deals, money for baby parts. No, sirree, that's not what we want to. We want to investigate the evil bastards that dared to videotape them. That's who we've got to go after.
Yeah, and I saw the thing last night while I was traveling back home that the DOJ was going to investigate the videos, and I just retweeted it with a because I wasn't necessarily sure that they were going to be investigating Planned Parenthood. My guess is that they are going to be investigating the Center for Medical Progress to see whether or not,
of course, they are, certain
laws were broken, and just the same way they did with 60 Minutes and Dateline NBC. Oh, wait a minute. They didn't do that with those guys, did they?
Because you see, here's my take of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is an amalgam of a whole bunch of little sub-constituency groups, right? You've got the enviros, you've got the pro-immigration, the open borders crowd, you've got the unions, teachers union, labor unions, all the different tentacles of unions that are all part of the amalgam, and then you've got the feminist movement, right? Or the choice movement. Every one of those individual subsections or subclasses of Democrat all fall in a linear hierarchy of who has credence and who has influence over anybody else. You can make the case that the gay agenda right now has moved up a couple rungs on the ladder, and they right now are running things. They're the ones that get to make the weather inside the Democratic Party. If you're pro-transgender or pro-gay agenda, pro-whatever, pro-rainbows, pro-flags, whatever else it is, boy, you're the bee's knees, and you make the weather in the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
The gay agenda bows to all the other groups. They bow to one group right now and one group only, and that's the abortion movement. The feminists, the pro-choice side of the Democratic Party, that reigns supreme. I'm telling you, that's nobody takes a back seat to that lobby in the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're too big to fail, but I'm telling you, if the Planned Parenthood thing gets traction enough where Planned Parenthood fails, the party collapses. I mean, that is a big underpinning of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is not the Democratic Party without the pro-choice movement in it. It just isn't.
Well, unions and pro-choice, I think, are significant components of it. But
even the unions, I think even the unions, if there's a conflicting interest, and it's one of those issues that do we step on the feminists or do we step on the unions? The unions get stepped on every time.
Yeah.
Not, you know what I'm saying?
No, I know exactly what you're saying, Duane, and I know exactly what you're saying. We're almost out of time, but look, even if the Department of Justice is investigating Planned Parenthood, don't expect that to be anything more than just a stall tactic to roll out the clock until the end of the Obama administration. Nobody's going to jail.
Political issue?
Is it a political issue?
In 2016, is it a political issue?
I think it's one of those background things. I don't think it's going to be a front and center political issue. It's going to be one of those things around the edges. And I will tell you this. I mean, you take a look at the way Mark Halperin got stuffed by Rick Perry last week, and the way Carly Fiorina turned it around on Jake Tapper.
She did too, didn't she?
She did. And hey, I like Jake. Jake's a great guy.
And Jake wasn't the bad guy there, and she wasn't trying to make him the bad guy there.
No, she was trying to make Hillary the bad guy, and that's the way you do it.
What Carly showed, and again, you can say what you want about Carly. I get, she didn't run a successful campaign in California for a myriad of reasons. But say what you want about Carly. What she showed in that interview with Jake, and I'm not taking anything away with Jake. Jake's a good friend of the show. We like him a lot, and he's not the punching bag here. But what Carly did is showed the Republicans this is how you do messaging. It was messaging 101.
Yep.
You don't take the premise. You've got the goal in mind. You take the issue and you take it to the person you want to take it to. And it wasn't Jake. It was MSM at large, and it was mostly Hillary.
Hillary Clinton. Yep.
And that was masterfully done by Carly yesterday.
All right, Duane. So what's coming up on tonight's Hugh Hewitt Show?
John Campbell's back with us once again. We are going to be talking all things Iran deal since John Forbes Kerry, why the long-faced John, was in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee today. We're going to be talking to Mark Stein, columnist of The World.
Excellent.
One of the members of said Foreign Relations Committee, that would be Georgia Senator David Perdue, will be joining us.
Oh, excellent. Great. Yeah.
David Drucker, Washington Examiner. Bill Crystal of the Weekly Standard will join us. We're going to be talking to Professor Jeffrey Korn of the Gaza Assessment Task Force, and he's another one of these guys that's looking at the Iran deal and what it means to Israel, which is going to be an interesting conversation.
Indeed.
Michael Rubin of the American Enterprise Institute also knows a thing or two about foreign policy and that kind of stuff.
You bet.
And if that weren't enough, we're going to conclude the show with a conversation with John Fisher Burns, for 40 years, the top foreign correspondent for the New York Times.
New York Times. Excellent foreign correspondent. Looking forward to that. And of course, it starts in about 1 hour.
Yes, it does.
On the Hugh Hewitt Show. And you can watch that on the Huniverse, HUGHNIVERSE.com. The troll-free web surfing experience for Hugh Hewitt fans. I'm a member. You should be a member as well. And if you're not, well, here's your chance. It's inexpensive, and it's lots of great content, including the after show.
Well, believe me, it's going to cost a lot less than that Iran deal. It's going to cost a lot less than Obamacare.
It's a lot less painful than both of those two things, too. Now, that's not a great selling point, but I'm just saying. So if you're not watching it on the Universe, shame on you, but you can catch it on the AM radio dial. Duane, what should people do if they can't find it on their AM radio dial?
That's easy. Cut a side deal. If you
cut a side deal.
If you cut a secret side deal, Congress doesn't even have to know.
But you might get fleeced if you cut a secret side deal. So what I would suggest is going to HughHewitt.com and listening to the audio stream there. Duane, Generalissimo Patterson, the Hugh Hewitt Show. Next week, I come into your dominion there, and I guest host for Hugh Hewitt.
On Wednesday.
On Thursday.
On Thursday. You're Wednesday.
I am?
You're Wednesday.
I thought you said the 30th.
I thought you said the 29th.
I can do either one, by the way. Or I could do both.
Well, let me break a little bit of news here. Coming up next Wednesday on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Yeah, you're doing Wednesday.
I'm all right. We'll do Wednesday, the 29th. So there you go. Breaking news, folks. I'll be there on the 29th. Good thing that we actually touch base on that.
Show prep.
Duane, Generalissimo Patterson of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Thanks for being with us today. We will talk to you again on Wednesday and Thursday next week.
You got it.
See you later.
See you guys.
All right. And right now we're going to go ahead and call Jordan Lorence. And Duane says to say hi to him, but we will first off look up his phone number, get this thing dialed up. There we go. Jordan Lorence from Alliance Defending Freedom. We'll introduce him more formally.
Hello, this is Jordan.
Hi, Jordan. This is Ed Morrissey from Hot Air, and we're live on the air as we speak. How are you doing, sir?
Great. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you as well. And just wanted to, first off, thank you for being with us today. I'm going to introduce you more formally here. He's a senior counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom. His work encompasses a broad range of litigation with a primary focus on defending the First Amendment freedoms of public university students and professors. And speaking of public universities, you are a Golden Gopher. You're a University of Minnesota grad. I did not know that.
I was born in Minneapolis, grew up in Mound, and went to law school at the University of Minnesota, and worked at the state senate in St. Paul right after law school, before my big move to Washington D.C.
Well, there you go. This is the Minnesota moment here. We're doing
right.
this. We're doing this live from the Twin Cities, or really from my office, could be anywhere, but it is actually in the Twin Cities. So great to have you on the show, and we wanted to cover a couple of topics with you. First off, Alliance Defending Freedom does a lot of great work defending the rights of all people, not just professors and students at universities.
Sure. Yes.
The religious liberties. And of course, you've argued at the Supreme Court, and you are deeply involved in a lot of these cases. Jordan, give us your sense of how religious liberty fared at the Supreme Court this year.
Well, the cases were not quite as prominent as some of the other biggies that came down from the Supreme Court, but there were a couple of big ones that were won, including one that ADF handled over a sign ordinance from Gilbert, Arizona, which is a pretty large suburb of Phoenix. And basically, when you put up a temporary sign in the middle of the road, in the median, how long it could be out there and how big it could be depended on what it said. So if it was a political sign, it could be out for 4 months. It could be, I think it was 30 square feet. But if you said, my church meets over here at this school, it could only be 6 square feet and only out for 12 hours, which meant if you had a 10 o'clock service in the morning, you couldn't put it out till 10 p.m. at night, which really, draws the people. The Supreme Court struck that down as unconstitutional. And that is, even though you might think, signs, they're kind of, esoteric and who cares about that? The rules that you can't discriminate on the basis of what the speech is very important.
Right.
As well as they ruled that the lower court in this case had ruled that good motives basically exonerate an otherwise unconstitutional law. Like they didn't mean to hurt religion, which to me is like ridiculous. Like, so what the motives are? If the thing's unconstitutional, if the law is unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional. It doesn't matter whether you had good motives or bad motives. And so a lot of the general rules for religious liberty and freedom of speech got cleared up in a good way. But I realize that it's more the First Amendment geeks that might get into that sort of stuff.
No, but I mean, we talked about this at the summit a couple of weeks ago, which was that there are broader implications from this Gilbert case than just signs in the road. The way that this was,
right.
I believe, the way that this was ruled was actually a little bit broader than that, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what that broader ruling meant.
Well, for example, like I wish I would have gotten this case from the Supreme Court a number of months ago. We've been fighting this case in New York City where they say everybody can meet in the empty school buildings on weekends except religious groups conducting a worship service. And we lost at the Federal Appeals Court for, they didn't mean to hurt religion, and this is okay to single out religion and treat it differently than everybody else. The Supreme Court in this Reed case versus the town of Gilbert basically wipes out that kind of reasoning, and so this is a very big principle that applies to lots and lots of different cases.
What was the vote on Reed versus Gilbert?
Well, this is pretty amazing. It was unanimous, and Kennedy wrote it, and it was a great decision. And we're very, very. I'm sorry, Clarence Thomas wrote it, and it was a great decision. And we're very, very happy that this intrepid band of my colleagues here at ADF put together a case that wins unanimously at the Supreme Court. It is like playing in the Super Bowl, and it's always great to win up there.
Well. Okay, so that leads me into the other topic that I wanted to discuss here. We've kind of gone over, the year in religious liberty cases a little bit here in thumbnail form. But what's it like to argue at the Supreme Court? You guys do this a bit at Alliance Defending Freedom. I mean,
right.
You're taking on important cases that get certiorari at the Supreme Court. So obviously you have some experience with that.
Yeah, it is. It is that they get about 8,000 cases a year appealed, and they take about 80. And so, and it's not a random lottery. So if you really got to give a case that basically says this is an important question, the lower courts are divided, and then there's a real skill to it. It's really a different game, and I've just been fortunate over the years. Even though I graduated from an august, law school at the University of Minnesota, we didn't have any training in the Supreme Court stuff and all that. And it's just sort of learning by doing. And I worked at places where they had Supreme Court cases. I just go up and watch Supreme Court oral arguments. I've gotten to know a number of the justices before they got onto the Supreme Court, just when they were obscure. And you get to see how it's done, and it is there's a real technique. I mean, for example, when you get asked questions at the Supreme Court, are they asking you a question that they want answered, like where is that in the record? Or what they frequently do, because the justices have not discussed these cases before, is they basically argue with each other through the attorney that's up there. Isn't it a better answer to your question, to Justice Breyer's question, blah, 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 blah? And you got to know enough to kind of stand out of the way and be the pass-through guy rather than thinking you're actually getting asked a question you're supposed to answer. And there's all sorts of little nuances like that. I mean, I remember once that Rehnquist, one of the things we'd have to tell people when Chief Justice Rehnquist was on the bench, he would get up at about 35 minutes. There were 60-minute oral arguments because his back was really sore. He'd had back surgery, and he would get up and go to the back and walk around. And sometimes people didn't realize it and thought like, oh, did I just insult him? Is he so aghast at what I just said that he got up and walked out? So we have to say, just don't let it freak you out that, Chief Justice Rehnquist just stood up and, walked to the back. So there's things like that. You got to think through all, what about this difficult question? If we rule in favor of you, what about the Ku Klux Klan? Would they be able to do the exact same thing, or whatever, extreme group you can think of? And that's the kind of stuff you have to anticipate so you can really, answer all the questions and do a stellar performance at the high court.
Jordan, the only time I've actually ever seen a depiction of this in pop culture, and I may be wrong about this, maybe there's been more than this. There was a movie about the Supreme Court, I think the first Monday in October, with Jill Clayburgh and Walter Matthau, like 30 years ago or something like that. But also People versus Larry Flint, a movie I didn't particularly care much for. But the Supreme Court scene in that with Edward Norton playing the attorney seemed to be at least within the ballpark of what you'd expect that sort of interchange to be. I don't know if you ever saw the movie. I would recommend it.
I saw the first one, not the People versus Larry Flint. And I wish I would have seen the other one. The other one I can comment on, they did stuff that would have been, they could have, hired me for an hour or two, and I could have sat on looked through their script and said, this isn't how they do it at the Supreme Court. Like they had in the other movie with Jill Clayburgh, I remember they would ask one counsel a question and then turn to the other one and say, well, is that right? Can you stand up and come back to the podium? And that's not how it works. But then I guess if nobody knows what's authentic, then, nobody's, unless the guys like us that just marinate in it all the time, are freaking out like, oh man, that's not the way it's done, that sort of thing.
Well, I got to tell you that, for those of us who occasionally run across things in our area of expertise in Hollywood filmmaking, we're usually pretty disappointed with the authenticity of what they're just. It's entertainment. It's for strictly entertainment purposes. It's not meant to be a primer on this sort of thing, but. It just seems like it would be extremely daunting. I mean, your first time up there must have been a bit nerve-wracking, I would imagine.
Well, it normally would be. The reason why it wasn't for me was that when I moved to Washington, D.C. in 1984, and then I argued in 1999 for the first time, is I just went up and watched Supreme Court cases all the time. And just got very familiar with the environment, so that when when Chief Justice Rehnquist at that time called my name, I thought I would be scared, but it was a very familiar environment. And And so I just, people got to see that there's significance. If something's easy for them to do in their life, like it was easy for me to go to the Supreme Court, I took advantage of it, and it has served me well in, being able to function up at the Supreme Court.
Let me ask you a question about the questions, because one of the popular pastimes for people who are watching Supreme Court action is to note that, Justice whoever asked a very tough question of the plaintiff, or seemed to ask questions that derided the position of the respondent, or whatever this is. And people then try to say, well, this is not looking good for whatever party is apparently not looking good for. How much can you tell about the direction of the court from the questions that they are asking you in oral arguments?
I think it is more accurate now than it was like 20 years ago. I felt like you got a lot more 20 years ago devil's advocate type questions, and so it was hard to see where people were coming from. I think now the opinions of where people are is pretty apparent. Even if they're undecided, I think that they're kind of open about their undecidedness. Now, what can, when people say, well, look, they seem to be going in this direction during the oral argument, and then the opinion goes in this entirely different direction, and we don't understand this. And I think that it could be, people were just reading the tea leaves wrong from the oral arguments. But I also think when they actually start writing a decision, you got 9 people negotiating, and sometimes the negotiations will take them in a different direction. And they decide, we're going to go this way rather than that way. And if you read some of these books that have been written where they've interviewed Supreme Court justices as, undisclosed sources, and then write about this, it's pretty amazing how big cases have shifted directions through the negotiations in hammering out the opinion. And now, but a lot of the stuff I think is pretty predictable. Like when they had the marriage oral arguments at the end of April, I think everybody was pretty much predicting the result that finally came down at the end of June. And then Kennedy said a few things that sounded like he might be wavering, but the more he talked, the more I said, he's going to go the wrong way on this and strike down a state's power to define marriage as one man and one woman, which is exactly what he did.
Right. And so you weren't necessarily surprised at the decision itself in Obergefell as a result.
No. And in fact, let me just say this, as they hand down the decisions, because I want to make an observation, but just so that people get the scene, is that in May and June, they just come in and hand down decisions, and they read these summaries from the bench, and they're all there. And I always go in and because I feel like you get to see kind of their emotions and that, and sometimes they'll read dissents and all of this. So I was in there when Obergefell, the marriage case, came down. I was in there when the death penalty case came down the next day, and the day before when they had Obergefell, when they upheld Obamacare. And the thing that I would say that was different from all of the, in the past is that they're pretty good about maintaining interpersonal peace and goodwill even when they really disagree. That was really breaking down this year. There was a lot of open hostility that was being stated in the courtroom, and not just by Justice Scalia, who I have immense respect for. But basically, there was just a lot of kind of, catfighting that was going on among the justices in the way they would read their comments. Now, some of them temperamentally are a little more volcanic than the others, but you could tell, like when John Roberts says, who do we think we are to strike down marriage? This is a decision by 5 lawyers. He's giving big insults to his colleagues, because that's just his temperament, the way that he does this.
Right.
And I just think that these issues of how you interpret the Constitution are really important, because I think what was triggering people was they were saying some of these majority decisions were basically saying, we don't care what the Constitution says, we're just viewing ourselves as 5 justices who are like philosopher kings that just sort of can impose whatever, we're the enlightened, ascended masters that can tell people what's, good for them to do. And that is really annoying. And it's not a rule of law. It's not ruled by the people. And I think that's why you are getting dissents like Scalia did in basically all of those cases. And John Roberts did in the marriage case.
Well, and I believe it was Scalia, may have been Roberts as well, who suggested or flat out said that this is the act of a super legislature, not a court, and that this is something that should be decided as a public policy rather than creating these rights out of thin air. You've heard people talk about reactions to sort of this super legislating, which is not new, by the way. I mean, when you and I were in the same room together about 2 weeks ago, I was mentioning Lorence v. Texas, which I thought was also a case of super legislation. I don't think anybody was going to defend the law that was being challenged in Texas. But it wasn't unconstitutional. It was just a dumb law. And the Supreme Court decided that they were wiser than the state of Texas and decided to invalidate it anyway. And that led directly to Obergefell. And I know that because I believe it was Kennedy who cited it 18 different times in his decision.
Right.
It's a very clear line between that super legislative decision and the super legislative decision that you got now. And it just seems like this court has sort of become unmoored from their traditional constitutional operation. And so you're getting suggestions that there has to be a different check on the Supreme Court other than just the appointment power, that Congress needs some way to check it, or that there needs to be maybe elections to check the direction of the Supreme Court. I don't know if you've got an opinion on that, but if you do, I'd be interested in hearing it.
Well, I think that there is a need for that, but what exactly is the right one? I am not sure yet. There was a hearing yesterday on Capitol Hill by some subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Ed Whalen from National Review Online spoke at it, and he has this really excellent speech, and I encourage anybody to read it, where he talks about this lawlessness, where basically a majority of the justices, like you said, are taking their public policy preferences and then saying that they're basically imposing them as matters of constitutional law. And, so reasonable people can disagree, for example, on the death penalty or prayer in school or sodomy laws or same-sex marriage. And legislatures should argue those out, but not have them say there's a constitutional right. That is saying, because I think my public policy view is the right idea, I'm going to impose it as a constitutional right. Now, what Ed Whalen suggested were things like term limits for Supreme Court justices, make it easier to amend the Constitution. I'm just doing this from memory. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones that they had, but those are the kinds of things that are being discussed, and I think that is appropriate. One of them that he said was that Congress could vote to overturn a Supreme Court decision, which I have to think about a bit, because I think then you get into some separation of powers things that it would be kind of weird to have a popular vote. If you brought a lawsuit, it went up to the Supreme Court and you win, and then Congress repeals it by a vote. I don't know. I just have to kind of get my head around that.
It's kind of a bill of attainder.
I'm not so sure what I think about that.
It's kind of a bill of attainder issue at that point in time. I mean, it's almost kind of like that.
Yeah.
And I could see where you could have some sort of mechanism where Congress could overturn the precedent of the decision by saying it doesn't. Maybe I'm not even sure that would. What you're right applies only to the parties before it and cannot be cited as precedent. And I think that it's good to have these kind of discussions, because there is a lawlessness to the Supreme Court, and what I think is interesting is that there's a list of so-called conservative decisions by the Supreme Court that the liberals hate, that they've got to realize that
this is becoming more and more political. I mean, like, it's not like the wonderful liberal decisions of the Supreme Court are valid interpretations of the Constitution. So any of these things that we're suggesting are somehow attacks on the Constitution.
Right.
I think it it holds in check lawmakers. Now, maybe there's a way to, I don't know, make the impeachment process a little more vigorous, or I don't know, that you can recall, justices on the Supreme Court or something. And even if people are cringing at those kinds of things, I think we have to do that, or else we're saying anybody who can get 5 votes on the Supreme Court rules the world, and that should not be in a free society.
No, it shouldn't be. And the Supreme Court, I'm cringing at some of these things. If we had a court that was sufficiently humble about the breadth of their powers, we wouldn't even countenance these suggestions. But it's clear that this is not a court that is independent of politics anymore, or even being held within its jurisdiction. This is a court that's deciding that, like you said, any 5 of them can get together and pass any sort of social program that they like, and chalk it up to some sort of emanation from a penumbra of some part of the Constitution.
Yeah.
That's simply not self-governance any longer. That is Star Chamber rule, and that is a huge problem. I do want to get to one more thing, and I'm not sure if you're sufficiently versed in this, Jordan. So if you're not, feel free to say, "Hey, great, but I don't know much about this." I got this maybe about an hour before the show started, which is that the U.S. Court of Appeals in the Ninth Circuit in Stormans versus Weisman, that will force pharmacists to dispense drugs contrary to their conscience instead of referring to other pharmacists, will be appealed by Alliance Defending Freedom. I don't know if you're in the loop on that case or not.
I have. I just found out about this right before the interview here, and I have worked on that case. I have not read the decision, but we are going to appeal that case. I think, unless the press release says differently, we're either going to appeal to all the judges on the Ninth Circuit out in San Francisco or directly to the Supreme Court.
It doesn't say one way or the other. Yeah, it doesn't say en banc or to the Supreme Court. I think it leaves it open. So.
Okay, I think we're thinking about that, and Kristen Wagner, who's just been doing an outstanding job in that case, will figure out what to do with this. The issue with this, and this is what I try to say to people who, when they say, pharmacists shouldn't be able to deny, contraceptive drugs that they think are abortifacients, that's just wrong and discriminatory or something like that.
Or the price of citizenship, right? It's the price of citizenship, the New Mexico court ruled.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what I think I'm to do is I say, look, you got to reverse the moral polarity of these situations and see if you really like your rule of law. So say it's like a state that has the death penalty, like Texas or Virginia, and their state pharmacy board orders every pharmacist in the state to sell drugs used for executing convicted murderers, or you lose your pharmacy license, or you're punished for an ethical violation. Now, do you like that rule? Or do you say, hey, look, there's plenty of pharmacists that are going to be willing to do this, so we're not going to impose this on absolutely every pharmacist in the whole state? And that's what happened here in the Stormans case, is they said everybody's got to provide this certain class of drugs that like the Plan B drug, Ella, some of these others that basically have are very controversial because they have an abortifacient effect.
Right.
Now the thing is that every pharmacist is not required to carry every drug. If you go, down the road to a drugstore in Eagan or Minneapolis or Rochester or wherever, there's times when you can't get drugs, or they will specialize in juvenile treatment or chemotherapy drugs or something like that they make market decisions to do that. And they're not punished as saying, oh, well, you're discriminating or something like that. So referring people from pharmacy A to pharmacy B happens all the time, and it's not viewed as some sort of, discriminatory thing, or you're denying health care or letting women die or something like that. And I think that this was just an ideological decision by the State Pharmacy Board in Washington State, and it is tragic that the Ninth Circuit reversed and said, this is okay for these kind of political decisions to be made by a professional licensing board in the state.
So the decision is going to be appealed. It's either going to go en banc, which is the whole Ninth Circuit, or it's going to go to the Supreme Court.
Right.
It might be another year or two, though, before, if you go to the Supreme Court, it might be another year before we find anything out about this, right? Yeah.
Right.
So
that's exactly right.
Yeah, so this is going to be ongoing, and of course you can keep up with it at adflegal.org, where they're going to be obviously keeping the pressure on, and you can find out more about Jordan Lawrence's cases there, and all the cases at ADF. They're constantly fighting these battles. They are doing it as an organization dedicated to making sure that people whose rights are being infringed can defend themselves, regardless of the resources they have at hand. And they've represented some mighty fine folks. We were talking last week, or 2 weeks ago rather, about the Kelvin Cochran case with Carrie Kupek,
right,
who's actually out here in the Twin Cities this week doing some radio interviews. And so we're just going to keep an eye on all of those cases. Jordan, do you have your own Twitter account? We should probably promote your Twitter account if you've got one.
No, I don't, and probably because I'm probably too stuck in the past, or I got to learn how to do that.
No, probably because you've got a life.
No,
it's probably because you got a life and you want to get things done. So you don't get on Twitter, and that's actually a really wise decision, Jordan. I think you've got the right idea. You've got the right idea. But ADF Legal and Alliance Defends, at Alliance Defends, that's the Twitter account for Alliance Defending Freedom, and adflegal.org is the website. Jordan, thanks so much for being with us. Great talking with you. Thanks again for the summit. It was tremendously helpful, and just look forward to talking with ADF folks from here on out.
Thanks to all the Minnesota taxpayers for subsidizing the University of Minnesota to teach me all this law stuff that I do.
This is great. It's actually paying off. I don't know. They spent $200 million on a football stadium not long ago. I kind of like the Jordan Lawrence decision a lot better. So there you go.
Amen. Yes.
Amen.
Good talking to you, Ed.
Thanks, Jordan.
And it's only 1 month of the state fair.
That's right. 1 month of the state fair. Are you coming out for that?
Probably not this year, but we try to do every year. I think we've done like the past 4 years, and maybe ADF should have a booth there, and we'll have lawsuit on a stick or something there.
You should do that. That would be awesome. You could do ADF masks and stuff like that. That'd be awesome. All right,
I would.
Jordan.
Okay, good talking to you, Ed.
Good talking to you, sir. Jordan Lawrence has been my guest. We'll go ahead and move to the end of the show here. The end of the show. I believe we're going to get Andrew Malcolm back next week. So Tuesday we'll be back on live. Tuesday, we're going to actually have a busy week next week on the radio. Tuesday, I'll be doing this show. Wednesday, I'll be doing the Hugh Hewitt show, which is a bit of a surprise because I thought it was actually Thursday I was going to be doing the Hugh Hewitt show. But July 29th, on the air with Hugh Hewitt. Thursday, back here, the Ed Morrissey show. And Friday, I will be guest hosting for Drew Mariani on Relevant Radio. So I will have a very busy week, and I hope that you will be there for all of those things. I want to just promote one more time the Bias book. This is the seminal book on media bias. If you haven't read this book before, you owe it to yourself to do so. Get this version of it. I wrote the foreword to it, and I think you'll enjoy that. But it is a book you must read if you have not read it yet already. All right, so Tuesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Central, 1 on the left coast. Andrew Malcolm, I believe, returns. I'll double check on that, but I believe Andrew Malcolm's coming back. Let's go ahead and see who's been in the chat room. At Cranky T-Rex, that's at Cranky T-Rex is, of course, is his Twitter handle, Cranky T-Rex, Duke of the Dance, running the chat room, as always, doing the work that only he can do. Only he can do it. His Twitter handle, at Cranky T-Rex. He's at crankytrex.blogspot.com. He's at buzzpo.com, where he does some writing there, and at hotair.com, where he's done some writing for us. And it's always great to have CT Rex's blog posts, and one of them's coming up today. So tune in for that. If it's not up already, may have been put up already, but if it's not, it's coming up shortly. So just keep an eye on hotair.com for that. Let's play a little walking music, see who else has been in the chat room. And we'll tune this up. I almost played something else. Let's turn that down a bit. For some reason, the volume levels kind of got screwy today, so I apologize for that. But and luckily, I remembered to go back and put my byline in it. Absolutely, we're all lucky that you did that, CT Rex. And it was pushback. Okay. Conservative and Liberal Hands, Guelph, Iron Ked, Jeff Dunitz from jeffdunitz.com, another great blogger, another great friend of ours, great friend of mine. His hearing may have recovered after hearing me and the first mate sing happy birthday to him. You'd have to double check on that, but you'll have to talk loudly if you do. Juanito Cabron, Marlaw 55, Mr. Fastbucks, Null Unit 60, Opachanga, Prairie Dog SD, T-Rand is here as T-Rand. It's like 2 in a row, or T-Rand is just T-Rand. I don't know what happened there. TR4A, my cousin Mike. Great to have my cousin Mike here in the chat room. Let's see, anybody else here? Usually we have Via Paso from the Ancestral Morris Events, but she's not in the chat room today. It's possible she's watching the show, so hi, Mom. And the first mate behind me, keeping me on the straight and narrow. Who hosts your website, blog, makes a difference. Host with my alter ego, Alex at 3 Planets Internet Solutions, and follow me on Twitter at Conservative and Liberal Hands, at CILH1. Alex at 3 Planets. So there you go. I don't host with Alex, but I'm sure his services are awesome, and I won't even mention who I use for my hosting. My hosting, by the way, is not Hot Air. That's Salem. That's an in-house server farm. My host is regarding my archives from Captain's Quarters. I still have that going. So, and I love the company I'm working with. But let's just promote Alex at 3 Planets Internet Solutions, 3planets.com. There you go. Happy to do a little bit of shameless someone else promotion here on the Ed Morrissey Show. All right, folks, don't forget, Tuesday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 3 p.m. Central, 1 on the left coast. Andrew Malcolm returns, I think. Until then, have yourselves a great, great weekend, and don't miss a minute of the Ed Morrissey Show. We'll see you later.